Have you ever looked at your garden in the middle of a blazing summer, wiping sweat from your forehead, and wondered why you are working so incredibly hard for just a few baskets of tomatoes? What if I told you that the entire system we have been taught about growing food is actually designed to keep us working harder, not smarter? Today, we are going to talk about the ultimate gardening secret. We are going to look at the immortal plant that never dies, and how planting just a few specific crops this April can literally feed your family forever. Why is this hidden from us? Because a gardener who only has to plant a seed one time is a gardener who stops buying expensive supplies every single spring. Many people will argue that a real vegetable patch requires breaking your back with a shovel every autumn, but I am going to prove that idea completely wrong. By the end of this video, you will know exactly how to triple your food harvest while doing only a fraction of the physical labor. Are you ready to completely change how you look at your backyard? Let me know in the comments if you are team digging or team lazy gardening, because things are about to get very interesting. Before we reveal these specific immortal crops, we need to understand a very simple piece of biological history. For thousands of years, humans relied heavily on perennial plants. These are plants that live for many years, surviving the freezing winters and returning bigger and stronger every spring. But somewhere along the line, modern agriculture shifted its focus almost entirely to annuals. Annuals are plants like regular tomatoes, cucumbers, and peppers that live for only one short season, die, and force you to buy new seeds the next year. It is a brilliant business model for seed companies, but a terrible deal for your aching back. A perennial plant, on the other hand, spends its first year building a massive, deep root system. It stores energy underground like a giant biological battery. When spring arrives, it does not need to wait for a tiny seed to sprout. It simply unleashes all that stored energy and explodes out of the ground, giving you food weeks or even months before your traditional garden has even started growing. This is the foundation of the smart, lazy garden. We are shifting from being micromanagers of fragile seedlings to becoming orchestrators of a permanent, self-feeding food forest. Let us dive straight into one of the most famously hidden immortal plants, which is the Jerusalem artichoke. Imagine this plant as a magical underground apple tree that constantly produces food without you ever having to prune or spray it. You plant the tubers just one single time in the early spring, and by autumn you have a towering green giant that has multiplied its harvest by 20 times under the dirt. The most common myth surrounding root crops is that they require perfectly loose, sandy soil and constant artificial fertilization to grow to a decent size. The Jerusalem artichoke completely shatters that illusion. It thrives in poor soil, heavy clay, and even neglected corners of your yard where absolutely nothing else will survive. It is so aggressive in its growth that your only real job is making sure it does not take over the entire garden. When winter comes, the top of the plant dies back, but the crunchy tubers stay safely frozen in the earth, acting as a living root cellar. You just dig up what you want to eat for dinner and leave the smallest pieces behind in the dirt. Those tiny leftover pieces will automatically sprout the following spring, starting the entire massive food production cycle all over again. It is the ultimate survival food that commercial agriculture ignores. Now let us talk about a vegetable that literally walks across your garden, the Egyptian walking onion. Think of this incredible plant as an exploring scout that refuses to stay in one place. Instead of producing seeds at the top of its green stalks like a normal onion, it produces a cluster of tiny, fully formed baby onions. As these little bulbs grow heavier, the stalk bends down until the babies touch the soil, where they immediately take root and start growing a brand new plant a few inches away. The huge myth here is that growing onions requires starting tiny, fragile black seeds indoors, under expensive grow lights in the middle of winter. With walking onions, you bypass that entire frustrating process. Once you plant them, you have a permanent, ever-expanding patch of delicious green onions that survive freezing blizzards and scorching droughts. You can harvest the spicy green stalks early in the spring, use the little top bulbs for pickling in the summer, and dig up the main underground bulb in the autumn. It provides 3 different types of harvests from a single immortal plant. By letting just a few of them walk and plant themselves, you guarantee that your family will never have to purchase green onions from the grocery store ever again. No smart garden is complete without mentioning the legendary asparagus bed. Creating an asparagus patch is exactly like buying a 20-year savings bond for your backyard. Yes, you have to wait a little while for it to mature, but once it does, it pays you massive dividends every single spring. Many beginner gardeners are terrified of asparagus because there is a persistent myth that it is incredibly difficult to grow and requires constant pampering. The truth is actually the exact opposite. While the initial trenching and planting requires a bit of effort, a well-established asparagus crown is nearly indestructible. It sends its thick, fleshy roots several feet down into the earth, finding its own water and nutrients far below the reach of shallow summer weeds. When the weather warms up, it shoots delicious, tender spears out of the ground so fast you can almost watch them grow. If you leave the thin ferns to grow tall during the summer, they absorb massive amounts of solar energy, feeding the root system for the next year. An asparagus bed planted this April can easily outlive the person who planted it, offering buckets of expensive gourmet food for absolutely zero extra planting effort. It is the king of the lazy vegetable garden. We cannot discuss immortal crops without bringing up the absolute dinosaur of the garden, which is rhubarb. Rhubarb is like a prehistoric beast that wakes up early every spring just to feed you. Its giant tropical-looking leaves and thick red stalks are usually the very first sign of life when the rest of the garden is still asleep. A common myth among new homesteaders is that rhubarb needs to be constantly dug up, divided, and moved around to stay productive. In reality, a happy rhubarb plant wants to be left alone in a sunny corner with a thick blanket of compost. It has an incredibly deep, stubborn root system that scoffs at freezing temperatures and laughs at poor weather conditions. You simply grab the stalks near the base, give them a gentle twist and pull, and take your harvest straight to the kitchen. The enormous leaves can be chopped off and dropped right back onto the soil around the plant to act as a natural weed barrier and moisture trap. This plant is so resilient that many people discover ancient rhubarb patches growing wildly around abandoned farmhouses, completely untouched by human hands for decades, yet still producing massive amounts of food. It is the true definition of plant once and eat forever. Next on our journey is a plant that changes the rules of leafy greens entirely, the perennial kale. Imagine a cabbage or a kale plant that does not die when the snow falls, but instead grows into a woody, productive vegetable tree. Varieties like Taunton Dean or Daubenton kale can grow for 5, 6, or even 10 years, turning into massive bushes of continuous salad greens. The agricultural industry thrives on the myth that all brassicas, like broccoli and kale, are strict annuals that will immediately bolt, go to seed, and die as soon as the summer heat arrives. Perennial kales simply ignore this rule. Because they rarely waste their energy-producing seeds, they put all their effort into growing more and more delicious leaves. You simply snap off the side shoots whenever you want a fresh salad or a healthy smoothie. You never have to worry about cabbage white butterflies destroying your tiny, delicate seedlings, because an established perennial kale is so massive and robust that a few caterpillars barely even make a dent in its production. It stands in your garden like a reliable green fountain, offering fresh, nutritious leaves in the dead of winter when regular lettuce is just a distant memory. To truly build a garden that feeds you forever, we must look beyond just vegetables and integrate highly productive berry bushes. Think of a berry bush like the early bird of the fruit world. While massive apple orchards take a decade to reach peak production, plants like the haskap, also known as the honeyberry, will start feeding you sweet treats in just a year or two. The big myth that stops people from planting fruit is the idea that berries require endless chemical spraying, complicated trellises, and constant pruning. But if you choose tough disease-resistant varieties like gooseberries, red currants, or honeyberries, you are essentially planting a lazy person's dessert factory. These bushes naturally form a dense protective shape. They wake up incredibly early in the season, often surviving late spring frosts that would completely destroy normal fruit blossoms. Once you put them in the ground and give them a good layer of wood chips to retain moisture, your main job simply becomes beating the local birds to the harvest. A single mature currant bush can easily yield 10 to 15 pounds of fruit every single summer, and it will keep doing so for 20 years without you ever touching a shovel. Let us shift our focus to the soil itself, because to support these immortal plants, you need an immortal foundation. This brings us to the smart approach of the no-dig gardening method. Think of your garden soil not as lifeless dirt, but as a bustling underground city filled with billions of microscopic workers. The most destructive myth in modern gardening is the belief that you must vigorously till and turn over the soil every spring to let the roots breathe. When you run a heavy rototiller through your garden, it is like dropping a tornado on that underground city. It destroys the delicate fungal networks that bring water and nutrients directly to the roots of your perennial plants. Instead, the lazy gardener simply layers organic matter, like compost, autumn leaves, or aged manure, directly on top of the soil. The earthworms act as your free, tireless plows. They come up to the surface, eat the compost, and carry those rich nutrients deep underground, perfectly aerating the soil naturally. By never digging, you allow the complex root systems of your permanent crops to thrive completely undisturbed. You save hours of back-breaking labor, reduce your weed problems by 90%, and create incredibly healthy plants. Feeding an immortal garden requires a different approach than just buying bags of blue powder from the hardware store. We use a brilliantly lazy technique known as chop and drop. Imagine nature operating as a self-feeding loop where nothing is ever wasted. In a traditional garden, people spend hours raking up leaves, pulling weeds, cutting back stems, bagging it all up and driving it away, only to go to the store and buy fertilizer. This makes zero sense. The chop and drop myth buster is simple. Every single leaf and stem that a plant grows was built using nutrients pulled directly from your soil. If you throw those leaves in the trash, you are throwing away your soil's wealth. Instead, when you prune your berry bushes or cut back your perennial vegetables, you simply chop the stems into smaller pieces and drop them right onto the ground beneath the plant. This organic matter slowly breaks down, feeding the exact same plant it just came from. It acts as a free nutrient-dense mulch that holds in moisture and completely blocks out competing weeds. You are mimicking how a natural forest feeds itself, creating a closed-loop system that guarantees your plants have food forever, without you ever opening your wallet. If you really want to maximize food production with zero effort, you must understand the concept of fruit tree guilds. A lone fruit tree planted in the middle of a perfectly manicured grass lawn is like a person standing naked in a blizzard. It is stressed, exposed, and vulnerable. The myth of the clean orchard dictates that fruit trees need bare dirt or short grass around their trunks to thrive. But in reality, nature hates bare dirt. A fruit tree guild is a botanical bodyguard team planted directly under the branches of your fruit tree. You plant deep-rooted dynamic accumulators like comfrey to pull up deep minerals. You plant garlic and chives around the base to naturally confuse and repel pests with their strong scent. You plant shallow-rooted flowers to attract the exact specific bees needed to pollinate the tree blossoms. These companion plants work together in perfect harmony. The tree provides shade for the smaller plants, and the smaller plants provide food, protection, and mulch for the tree. By setting up this permanent cooperative community just one time, you eliminate the need for chemical fertilizers and toxic bug sprays. The tree stays healthy, and your family gets perfect, crisp fruit year after year. For continuous, effortless salads, we need to introduce sorrel into our lazy garden plan. French sorrel is the ever-flowing fountain of leafy greens. It has a bright, lemony flavor that completely transforms a boring salad into a gourmet meal. A huge misconception about growing salad greens is that they are fragile divas that bolt, turn bitter, and die the moment the summer temperature rises above 70 degrees. While that might be true for delicate iceberg lettuce, sorrel is built like an absolute tank. It is one of the very first greens to pop out of the thawing soil in early spring, and it continues to aggressively push out fresh, lemony leaves deep into the hot summer and all the way through the autumn frosts. It requires absolutely no coddling. In fact, if it starts to look a bit tired in the midsummer heat, your only job is to aggressively chop it completely down to the ground. Within just a few days, it will reward your lazy pruning by pushing up a brand new flush of perfectly tender, delicious leaves. Planting a row of sorrel means you have instant access to vitamin-rich greens for the next 10 years, requiring nothing more than a quick splash of water during severe droughts. Let us talk about a shocking secret regarding beans. We all know pole beans and bush beans as classic annuals, but the scarlet runner bean is actually a sleeping giant hiding in plain sight. Most gardeners treat the scarlet runner bean as a pretty flower or a one-season vegetable, completely unaware of its immortal potential. The gardening myth says that all beans must sprout from a dry seed every single year, climb a trellis, make pods, and then die. But the scarlet runner bean is secretly a perennial plant in its native climate. It forms a thick, starchy tuber underground, very much like a potato. In colder climates, if you simply cut the vines down in autumn and protect the roots with a very thick layer of heavy straw mulch, or dig the root up and store it in a cool basement, it will survive the winter. When replanted in the spring, it does not waste time starting from a tiny seed. It explodes from that massive root system, climbing your trellis in record time and producing huge clusters of delicious, meaty beans weeks earlier than anyone else in your neighborhood. It is an incredible hack for the lazy gardener who wants massive vines and high-protein food with half the waiting time. When we look at the margins of our garden, we find forgotten treasures, like good King Henry. This plant is often referred to as peasant gold because it reliably fed rural families for centuries before modern supermarkets existed. Today, many neat and tidy gardeners mistake it for a simple weed and rip it out. The grand myth of modern landscaping is that a plant is only valuable if it was bought in a plastic pot from an expensive garden center. Good King Henry proves that the best food is often wild and free. It is a robust perennial green that tastes incredibly similar to spinach, but unlike spinach, it does not immediately go to seed and die when the sun gets too hot. You can eat the young shoots in early spring just like asparagus. You can cook the large mature leaves like traditional spinach, and you can even harvest the flower buds and cook them like tiny broccoli florets. Once you establish a small patch of good King Henry in a semi-shaded corner of your yard, it will quietly and persistently provide highly nutritious food for your family year after year. It asks for zero fertilizer, zero weeding, and absolutely zero attention. It just waits patiently for you to get hungry. To maintain a garden full of immortal plants, we must rethink our relationship with water. Your watering hose can be a tool of creation or a tool of weakness. We want to train our perennial roots to act like long-distance marathon runners, not lazy couch potatoes. The most common and damaging watering myth is that a garden needs a light, shallow sprinkling of water every single day to stay green. When you water lightly every day, the roots of your plant stay right at the surface of the soil, waiting for their daily drink. The moment a hot summer day hits, that top layer dries out, and your plants immediately panic and wilt. To create drought-proof, immortal plants, the smart gardener waters very deeply but very infrequently. We want to soak the soil down to a depth of 12 inches and then wait several days or even a full week before watering again. This forces the plant roots to dive deep into the cooler, permanently moist layers of the earth. Once a perennial vegetable or fruit bush has trained its roots to go deep, it becomes practically invincible to surface droughts. You save hundreds of gallons of water, and you free up hours of your time. Let us journey into the architectural wonders of the food garden with the majestic globe artichoke. Growing a globe artichoke is like building an armored fortress of food right in your backyard. Its striking, silvery green foliage looks like it belongs in an expensive botanical garden, yet it produces massive, delicious flower buds that cost a fortune at the grocery store. The prevailing myth is that globe artichokes can only survive in mild Mediterranean climates, and that northern gardeners should not even bother trying. While they do love the sun, smart gardeners in colder zones have learned how to trick these plants into becoming long-lasting perennials. By planting them in well-drained soil to prevent winter rot and covering the cut-back crowns with a thick mountain of dry leaves or straw, before the hard freeze sets in, you can protect the heart of the plant. In the spring, you pull back the mulch and the fortress rebuilds itself bigger than before. A mature artichoke plant can produce a dozen or more massive edible buds every single season. It is a stunning, high-yielding centerpiece for the lazy gardener who wants maximum visual impact and incredible culinary rewards without replanting. A crucial hidden mechanism that keeps our immortal crops thriving is an invisible underground internet called mycorrhizal fungi. This is where the magic of permanent planting truly happens. Imagine a microscopic web of threads connecting the roots of your berry bushes, your fruit trees, and your perennial vegetables. The old-fashioned myth of competitive gardening states that plants are always fighting each other for water and nutrients, meaning you must leave huge gaps of bare dirt between them. Science has completely debunked this. When you leave the soil completely undisturbed, these beneficial fungi attach to the plant roots, effectively multiplying their reach by 100 times. The fungi act as deep miners, extracting difficult minerals like phosphorus from the rocks and trading them with the plants in exchange for liquid sugars. This fungal network can even transport water from a deeply rooted tree across the garden to a thirsty vegetable plant. When you embrace the lazy method of never tilling your soil, you allow this natural internet to stay intact. Your garden stops being a collection of isolated, struggling plants and transforms into a single, massive, cooperative organism that feeds itself and protects your family. One of the greatest benefits of growing plants that never die is their incredible natural resistance to pests. A mature, well-established perennial has a hardened immune system that simply cannot be matched by a young, stressed annual seedling. The chemical industry makes billions of dollars selling the myth that bugs will inevitably destroy your entire harvest unless you spray toxic poisons every week. What they hide is that pests are naturally lazy. They always target the weakest, youngest, most stressed plants in the area. When a flea beetle or an aphid lands on a massive 5-year-old perennial kale bush or a deeply rooted currant bush, the plant has thick cell walls and complex natural defensive chemicals already built up. The plant barely even notices the attack. Furthermore, because you're not constantly clearing your garden to bare dirt every autumn, you're providing permanent winter homes for predatory insects like ladybugs and ground beetles. When spring arrives, your personal army of beneficial predators wakes up exactly when the pests do, handling the problem for you naturally. By doing less work, you actually create a balanced ecosystem that completely manages its own pest control. To get the absolute maximum food out of a small space, the lazy gardener must learn to look up. We need to utilize vertical space with powerful perennial vines like hardy kiwis or climbing grapes. Think of these plants as green skyscrapers that produce enormous amounts of fruit while taking up only a few square inches of precious ground space. A limiting myth for many backyard growers is that fruit farming happens strictly on a flat, horizontal plane. If you have a strong fence, a sturdy pergola, or even a dead tree trunk, you have the perfect real estate for an immortal vine. Hardy kiwis, for example, produce smooth, bite-sized fruits that taste sweeter than regular kiwis, and they can easily survive freezing winter temperatures. You plant the vine once, tie it to its support during the first 2 years, and then just let it climb. A single mature, hardy kiwi vine can easily yield 50 to 100 pounds of fruit in a single season. The foliage provides cool, dense shade in the summer, and the harvest requires nothing more than reaching up and plucking the fruit. It is an incredibly efficient way to turn a barren wall into a permanent vertical grocery store aisle. Transitioning to this style of permanent food production requires a massive psychological shift. You have to move from being an anxious micromanager to becoming a relaxed observer. The hardest myth to break for most traditional gardeners is the deeply ingrained idea that a messy garden is an unproductive garden. We have been conditioned to believe that neat, straight rows of exposed dirt with absolutely no weeds is the ultimate goal. But bare dirt in nature is a fresh wound. Nature wants to cover it up with diverse, chaotic, vibrant life. When you plant a food forest of immortal perennials, it will look wild. The rhubarb will flop over the asparagus, the walking onions will mingle with the sorrel, and the berry bushes will drop their leaves everywhere. This chaos is exactly what makes the system so resilient and so lazy. You must train your eye to see the beauty in an integrated, permanent ecosystem. Once you let go of the need to control every single square inch of dirt, you will find that gardening stops being a sweaty, stressful chore. You stop fighting against nature's desires, and instead, you let nature's immense, unstoppable momentum push your harvest forward. The final piece of the immortal garden puzzle is mastering the art of the harvest without damaging the mother plant. When you interact with perennial food sources, you are playing a totally different game. The metaphor here is financial. You want to take out the interest, but you absolutely must leave the principal investment intact. The myth of the harvest is that picking vegetables means the end of the plant's life, which is true for pulling up a carrot or chopping down a head of cabbage. But with immortal plants, you harvest carefully to encourage more growth. When you pick asparagus, you only snap off the spears for the first few weeks, leaving the rest to grow into giant ferns to recharge the root. When you harvest rhubarb, you leave at least 1/3 of the stalks on the plant to ensure it has enough solar panels to keep feeding itself. When you dig up your Jerusalem artichokes, you purposefully leave the little broken knobs in the earth. By understanding how to sustainably skim the calories off the top of your perennial system, you guarantee that the plant will not only survive the winter, but will return with double the energy next spring. It is the ultimate secret to endless food. As we pull all of these lazy gardening strategies together, the big picture becomes incredibly clear. Creating a garden that feeds your family forever is not about working harder, buying more expensive gadgets, or spending hours pulling weeds on your hands and knees. It is entirely about setting up a self-sustaining biological system just one time, and then getting completely out of the way. By planting Jerusalem artichokes, walking onions, massive berry bushes, and perennial kales, you are building a permanent food security net right outside your back door. You are utilizing the no-dig method to protect the soil, chop and drop mulching to provide free fertilizer, and relying on deep roots to survive severe weather. Modern agriculture hides this approach because it makes you totally independent. You become immune to fertilizer shortages, seed price increases, and seasonal crop failures. Every single year your garden gets older, it actually gets stronger, more resilient, and more productive, while demanding less and less of your time. This April, do not just plant a temporary garden. Plant a legacy that will feed you, your children, and your grandchildren for decades to come. And there you have it, the ultimate truth about the immortal plants they never wanted you to know about. By shifting your focus from fragile, needy annuals to these permanent powerhouse perennials, you are literally saving yourself years of back-breaking labor. Imagine walking out your back door 5 years from now with no shovel in your hand, no bags of expensive fertilizer, just an empty basket ready to be filled with crisp asparagus, sweet berries, and hearty root vegetables that planted themselves. That is the true power of working with nature instead of constantly fighting against it. Thank you so much for watching and for joining the lazy gardening revolution. If this video changed the way you look at your backyard, please hit that subscribe button and give the video a like so we can spread these hidden secrets to more people. Now, I want to hear from you. Which of these immortal plants are you going to add to your garden this April? Do you prefer the walking onions or the unstoppable Jerusalem artichokes? Drop your answers in the comments below, and I will see you in the next video.